This is Metro Week. Our top story, the Tucson City Council elections. Voters will consider candidates for 3 council seats in an election conducted by mail-in ballots. We'll ask officials with the political parties what's at stake this fall. Plus, our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. Wednesday was the deadline for Tucson City Council candidates to file their paperwork. At this point, it looks like Tucson Mayor Jonathan Rothschild will be re-elected without opposition. Rothschild is a Democrat who is running for a second term. No candidate filed petitions by the deadline to run against him, leaving only the prospect of a write-in candidate to oppose him later. In the November general election, voters will choose 3 city council members. In the West Side Ward 1, incumbent Democrat Regina Romero will face Republican challenger Bill Hunt. On the east side of Tucson, 2 Democratic incumbents also have Republican challengers. In Ward 2, incumbent Paul Cunningham faces Kelly Lawton. And in Ward 4, Shirley Scott seeks her 6th term in office, challenged by Republican Margaret Burkholder. Information on the candidates is on our website. The general election is citywide, so all registered voters in Tucson are eligible to vote on the November ballot. To find out more about the politics in play for the campaign, I asked top officials from both major political parties to discuss the election. Cheryl Cage is the Pima County Democratic Party chairwoman, and Bill Beard is the County Republican Party chairman. Bill, there's a slate of Republicans running for the city council seats this year, but no Republican turned in paperwork to run for mayor. Why is that?
It wasn't for lack of trying. When you make the decision to run for office, it's a complicated process because it's not just about you as an individual. It's you and everybody that's in your circle of friends and relations. You've got financial concerns, both personal and professional. You have concerns about your family, and ultimately it does come down to whether or not the other half, that spouse, is really supportive of the idea of you running for office. And I spoke to probably 40 to 50 different individuals this entire year seeking someone that was a possible mayoral candidate. We got down close several times, but it did come down to that personal decision that you've got to make when you decide to run for office. They decided it was not in their best interest to run for mayor at this time.
So last cycle, we actually saw later somebody qualified as a write-in candidate. Do you expect any Republicans to still be considering it and maybe file later as a write-in?
I don't leave any options off the table. It is my desire as party chairman to provide a full slate of individuals to run for office, but sometimes you do come up a little short. In this case, I think we found 3 very credible, viable, and electable candidates to run for the council offices. And if you look at the city of Tucson, like it or not, the mayoral position is more of a figurehead, and it's the council members themselves that have the real power, at least under the current charter. That is our desire, is to reshape what the city council look like and provide a real future for all of Tucsonans, not just folks that are in some way connected with the powers that be. The folks that we have out there, Kelly Lawton, Bill Hunt, Margaret Burkholder, these 3 individuals, they have not just professionally, but on a personal level, they have the real commitment to making sure that the future for Tucson is secured for all of our citizens, regardless of your political party, regardless of where you stand on any one issue. You need to have a thriving economy. You need to have good roads. You need to have all of the basics that you expect of your local government coming from the city council. Based on the track record of the incumbents, they've not been doing those things.
And you said that this week in a press release when the Republican candidates filed to make it on the ballot. And Cheryl, I want to ask you to respond to that a little bit. Bill mentioned roads and the budget, some things we hear about every election cycle, chronic issues. What are the Democrats' response to that?
Well, I'd first like to talk about everything that Bill said about running for office is absolutely true. But I do think that the mayor is a leader. He sets the tone, he sets the focus for where the city is going. And I think that Jonathan Rothschild has done an amazing job, and I truly believe that that's probably why people, when they looked at, am I going to run, they decided this man's doing a good job, I can't win. And I think that's probably why people eventually said no. As far as the roads and all of those things, one of the things that you have to remember is that we get a lot of money from the state, and the state has really decimated the city and town budgets. And you talk about roads, and that's certainly an issue. The city of Tucson has paved over 250 miles of roads under budget, and there's going to be a lot more to come.
And you're referencing the voter-approved
Yes.
property tax that pays
Yes.
for that.
And then also, you're talking about police. We have a new grant where we're going to be able to have 75 new police officers. And I think all you have to do is look around, look at downtown, go downtown any Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, and the place is hopping. The streetcar is a huge success. The economic development widening that this mayor and council have done has really been tremendous. There's thousands of new jobs that have come to downtown. This has been a really tough time, but our unemployment rate is lower than it has been since 2009. There are more Tucsonans getting a paycheck than there were in 2009. And I think that says something really wonderfully positive about this mayor and council.
I don't mean to pick on too small of an issue, but the reality is Mayor Rothschild, he owns what the city of Tucson has in terms of roads, in terms of funding and support for police and fire, the parks. All of those things are the result of decisions that mayor and council have made, not just in the last 4 years, but for several decades. The mayor is very beatable, as are the 3 council candidates that are up this year. Just one example, police funding. There were over 1,250 officers 5 years ago working for the city of Tucson. The current city mayor and council have, over the last 5 years, made a deliberate attempt to cut back on the total number of officers that are out on the streets of Tucson. By the end of this calendar year, 2015, by the budget that is currently being contemplated by the city council, there will be 800 officers on the street. You do not go from 1,250 to 800 and not have a direct impact on the public safety. By the city manager's own estimate, there was a memo that was put out about a week and a half ago from Martha Durkin. She actually referenced the issue of police and fire, and specifically fire, and I'll read directly from the memo. If we identified funding today, by the time the new vehicles are placed into service, 76% of our pumper fleet, 93% of our paramedic fleet, and 33% of our ladder fleet will be in need of replacement. That is because of the decisions of the current mayor and council. The current city manager is telling mayor and council, you have done such a poor job of taking care of the basics, like police, like fire, that even if we do what we need to do, based on your previous decisions, we are still going to be in a situation where 93% of the paramedic units a year from now will be past their use-by date. I don't know about you, but I would much rather make sure when I make a phone call to 911, I get a paramedic unit that can actually show up. I don't care whether there's a bus riding up and down the street at 15-minute increments of time versus 30 minutes.
I can see that Cheryl has a response.
Well, I think that you're really being kind of simplistic about it. I mean, we have gone through a terrible recession here. We have gone through the state cutting funding. The truth of the matter is that not one firefighter or police officer has been laid off in the last 5 years. We have a new grant for 75 new police officers coming. And you talk about the streetcar, but the streetcar and the businesses that people take that streetcar to are what are going to pay for the police and the fire. And so it's all intermingled. And I firmly believe that this mayor and council have done a tremendous job with a really horrible situation, as we've all been in a terrible situation. But the reality is you have to build the economic base. You have to have the jobs that are here in order to increase that fire and police. And there isn't any member on the city council or the mayor or you or I who don't want this to be the safest town that we can make it. And I think they're working very diligently towards doing that.
I'm going to jump in and ask you both to summarize. We've talked about some specific issues, but to summarize what's at stake in this election for City of Tucson voters. What matters? Why does it matter? Why should people vote? What's going to happen after this election? Bill?
It ultimately comes down to what kind of future you want to see for Tucson. Do you want to have a Tucson that has safe roads, safe streets in terms of police and fire, have the adequate funding to make sure that when you call 911, somebody's going to respond. And it's not just a matter of life or death, but if you've got a property crime, they will respond to you rather than referring you to a website. Do you have an economy for this entire region based upon what the City of Tucson does that provides for jobs, not just for you today, but for the future, for your kids and your grandkids? Entirely too many students that graduate from our best high schools and from the University of Arizona, a stellar school ranked internationally in many cases. Our graduates leave Tucson, a place we love dearly, because there are no jobs for them and there is no future for them. We need to provide in the form of city council candidates that make the wise decisions that provide a future, not for a selected few, but for all of Tucson.
And Cheryl?
Well, I think it's important, and I do think that voters have to say, what kind of city do we want? If you look at the state of Arizona, the Republicans have been in power for decades. What Bill is talking about is lowering taxes. That has not worked for this state. We are in a terrible mess because of the Republican approach. I think that this mayor and council will continue to do the stellar work that they've been doing, building up the economic base, fighting hard for good public education. You talk about the U of A. We both want the U of A to be the best it can be, but the Republican legislature and the governor have decimated the financial support to our universities. No wonder kids are leaving. So I think it is clearly voters need to look at what's happening to this state and say, is that what we want to happen to Tucson? And I think the answer is going to be loud and clear, no. We want a vibrant community with a vibrant downtown, lots of good, innovative jobs. And I think that that's what this city mayor and council are doing.
I want to thank you both for coming in. That's all we have time for, but we'll try to have you back soon. Thank you.
Coming up on Arizona Week, we explore summer topics, campaigns, fires, and the next school year.
When we want to make changes, it's important that we bring all people to the table. So this is just an opportunity to let people hear.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio this week are David Rupp-Calvis of Tucson Local Media, Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel, and Becky Palick of the Arizona Daily Star. Before we jump too far into the roundtable, I just want to make sure we do introduce David as the new editor of Tucson Local Media. We said goodbye to Thelma Grimes a few weeks ago, so welcome to the roundtable, David.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Now, Dylan, I want to have you weigh in a little bit on the city council election. We have no mayor's race. What reasons can we point to for that?
Well, the last several election cycles in the mayoral race, we haven't really seen too many contested elections. More often than not, we've seen either a Democrat running unopposed or a Republican running unopposed. So this isn't unusual, but really, if you're a Republican running for mayor in Tucson, it's kind of an uphill battle, at least lately. So it's really not surprising that no Republicans wanted to throw their hat into the race. Although if you go back, looking at about the past 50 years, more often than not, Tucson has been a Republican town, actually. Something like 34 out of the last 54 years or something. We've had a Republican mayor. So it's sort of an anomaly lately that the Democrats have had such a big edge.
And this mayor's been running a very efficient campaign. He turned in the maximum number of signatures on the first day you could file them. He already met the maximum fundraising limit to receive the matching public contribution. About 1 in 5 of his fundraising contributors gave the maximum level of money, so he's running a very quick campaign.
Which is something you do as a candidate to sort of, say to other people, hey, you don't want to run against me.
Now, what do you think about Bill Beard's answer in our interview that it's actually much more of a lifestyle choice than a political choice?
There is something to that. First off, we do not pay, especially at the city council level, but even at the mayoral level, it's not an enormously well-paying job. It's a very tough job, takes a lot of your time. If you are somebody who's going to be qualified to tackle the responsibilities of that position, you're probably somebody who's doesn't really want the job. It's a really kind of a rare bird for somebody who is going to be good at it, who wants to do it. You need to be in a very specific position in your life, and especially if you have both business and family responsibilities, it ends up being very tough to do.
Now, Becky, in the past, we've seen some challenges to the candidates' qualifying signatures, the signatures they have to turn in to make it on the ballot. Specifically, we've seen whole party challenges, so the Democrats might challenge those Republican signatures. Are we seeing any of that so far this year?
Not yet, but there's still time. The filing deadline was just a few days ago, and so there's plenty of time for candidates to challenge each other's signatures, and there's still time for write-in candidates to jump in here as well.
It does seem unlikely that we'll see these sort of signature challenges that we saw, 4 years ago, especially when, really, you'd have to throw out about half of the number of signatures to get any of these Republican council candidates off the ballot. And having that, percentage of them come in invalid seems pretty unlikely to me.
And what you're saying is that they turned in so many extra signatures
Yes.
that even if a lot of them were invalidated in a court challenge, they'd still have enough to be.
They hit either the maximum or almost at the maximum, so you'd have to really find a whole lot of people who were not eligible to sign those nominating petitions. Either they weren't registered to vote or didn't live in the right ward.
Last year, after the after the signature challenges, we ended up seeing some write-in candidates. And you did mention that the deadline, I think the deadline is July 16th for a primary write-in. Any rumors about that happening so far?
Well, there's an independent candidate in the Ward 4 race, Derek Espadas. He's still considering a run, so he hasn't quite decided yet, but that's one we could maybe watch for.
That's somebody who tried to gather signatures to get on the ballot as an independent, wasn't able to get them, but because he didn't turn in his petitions, he can still file to run as a write-in candidate in the primary.
He did say last week, I talked to him on the phone, and he said he was having trouble getting to that signature threshold, so certainly write-in is an option. And then a candidate who writes in and files as a write-in candidate needs to write their own name in, essentially on the ballot. If there's not any other write-in challengers, they would make it to the general election, and then we'd have an actual party competition there. Becky, I asked this of the party chair people, what's at stake here, and I want to ask you what the central themes of this election cycle are.
I think we're going to hear a lot about roads. We're going to hear Republicans saying Tucson's roads are a mess. We're going to hear Democrats saying we're making a lot of progress. That's with the $100 million voter-approved road bonds project that is repaving and resurfacing a lot of Tucson's main streets all over the city. I think we're also going to hear a lot of talk about budget priorities. I think that there hasn't been a lot of political will to cut spending or increase revenue, but Republicans are going to say we have to make changes. I think we're also going to hear a lot about jobs and the economy, downtown revitalization, and other things related to growing Tucson.
And David, what do you think, as editor of Inside Tucson Business, what are the implications of this election cycle for the business community?
Every election cycle is big for business. The businessmen and women will certainly pay a lot of attention. They'll go out and vote. They're always concerned about taxes. They're concerned about quality of life issues, which includes roads, police. They're concerned about parks. It's hard to attract and bring in good employees if they can't come here and have good lives. So they'll certainly pay a lot of attention. They'll vote. I can't tell you right now who they would vote for,
right,
but they are going to vote and they're going to pay a lot of attention. I do have a question for these guys, though. I've been hearing that this is going to kind of be a race where the Republicans are going to say all three of us or none of us, and the Democrats might do the same thing. Is that what you're hearing too?
Really, I think we're going to see both parties really trying to run as slates, and especially with the Republicans not having a mayoral candidate to be that standard bearer citywide. The general election, even though we're electing members of, who represent wards, is a citywide election, and it's important to have somebody at the top to, really beat that bully pulpit and try and turn out the vote. And that is a pretty big hurdle, I think, for the Republicans, because they don't have that person on the ballot right now.
Republicans are running a more organized campaign this year, though. They've got the full set of city council candidates for the first time since 2009. And so I think it's going to be a race to see which party can win more independent voters. And it's worth noting that independent voters can vote in the primary. They just need to select which ballot they want.
And speaking of a slate, we also saw those candidates all turn their signatures in on the same day. So it's clear that there is some collaboration in terms of planning how to get on the ballot so far. And then I do want to also mention that because there are no primaries, it's a little less important that we talk about the primary process unless some write-ins come in, but the primary would be August 25th and the general is November 3rd. Dylan, I do also want to switch to another topic, which is the Cherry Belle Post Office. We heard this week that has been slated for closure, and we heard this week that there's been a reprieve on that. So what really happened, and is a reprieve really notable at this point?
Well, the Cherry Belle is going to stay open in the fashion that it's been open for the past year or so, for at least another year. It was supposed to basically cease almost all sorting functions in the middle of July, and the Postal Service says they're going to move that into sometime in 2016. But really, the Postal Service, with the budget pressures that they're under because of their mandate to pre-fund retirement benefits, especially retirement health benefits, decades and decades in advance, their budget is really, really strapped. So they are trying as hard as they can to really, close facilities and limit service and attempt to save money. And they see this as one way to do it. So this is not the case of Cherry Belle is going to remain open forever. That's not a guarantee right now.
Becky, this has been a political issue for a while, but it's a federal issue. The Postal Service is a federal agency, but we saw this week recently some local politicians get involved. Who's been working on this?
Well, Vice Mayor Richard Fimbres has really been the champion for this issue. He's been conducting surveys, he's been making tours, he's been contacting other political figures to get them involved. He's really concerned about seniors and veterans maybe seeing a delay in benefits checks arriving in their mailboxes, and he's also really worried about the job cuts. That's a major employment center in his ward. And we've seen at the federal level, Representative Martha McSally is getting involved. She's asking for the Postmaster General to make a personal visit to the Tucson facility to see for herself what the cuts would mean.
David, any idea what the implications would be for the business community once this shutdown happens, even though it's been delayed at this point?
Yeah, post offices are a big issue for business. I mean, especially newspapers. I'm lucky our newspaper doesn't mail much, but I've worked for a lot of them that mail everything. And you take away Saturday delivery, you change a sorting facility, it just slows everything down. So from a business perspective, it would just slow things down. There's a lot of options out there as far as where you can mail to or mail from. But anytime you impact locally, it just slows the process down, which impacts business. So keeping it open for a year is good for business for a year. Keeping it open forever would be even more beneficial.
Why should somebody care about this if they don't work there, if they're not a business that uses bulk mail or mails a lot of things? What is the implication for a regular person?
The regular person's going to see a slowdown in when they get their mail stuff. You order something in the mail, typically that might go through this postal facility. Now it's going to have to go somewhere else. It's just going to slow things down. It may, in the grand scheme of things, a day or two might not be a big deal, but I can tell you from people getting newspapers, a day or two is enough that they're going to cancel their subscriptions.
I was thinking about the city election, and if that post office had closed before the election, which is conducted entirely by mail, you would have City Hall mail your ballot, it would go to Phoenix and then your house, and then when you sent it back, it would go back to Phoenix and then to City Hall. So, as long as you know that time limit, I guess it's not as impactful. But if something's in a hurry, like taxes, that could be different. Becky, also this week in the Arizona Daily Star, one of your colleagues reported that South Tucson is considering, it's a 1 square mile city and it's considering expanding. That seems like it has implications beyond just the 1 square mile people who live there.
That's right. The city of South Tucson, as Luis Carrasco reported, is trying to find new revenue streams. It wants to do it by annexation. The area it wants to annex is all part of the city of Tucson. I don't see the city letting that area go very easily. The city itself is trying to annex more area into its city for the same reason. Everyone's looking for a little more revenue these days. So I think it's a long shot. It'll be really interesting to see what happens there.
In fact, if we had a mayoral election, I'm sure we would have heard the candidates talking about their stances on annexation generally.
Absolutely. And Mayor Jonathan Rothschild is a big proponent for annexation right now.
What would the process be, actually, literally, what would the process be if South Tucson wanted to take over some of the city of Tucson?
Normally, the process of annexation involves getting a certain portion of the landowners and a certain portion of the taxpayers to sign off on the idea. But the fact that it's going from one city to one city, I think, adds a level to the process. So we'll have to see how that works.
The city of Tucson and the city of South Tucson, the residents and businesses would all have to come to some amount of agreement, it sounds like. Well, typically we see unincorporated areas being annexed, and that's actually what the city is seeking out when the mayor talks about annexing areas, commercial areas. So yeah, possibly a new process for all of us.
Frontier.
Yeah. David, this week's cover story on Inside Tucson Business is about the changing function and the changing services provided in senior living facilities. What did you find out?
It's changing a lot. Seniors are becoming more demanding. They want a lot more options where they live. They want it all where they live too. They don't want to have to go anywhere. They want to be able to eat and play and have fun and hang out with their friends and do everything from home, and they're willing to pay for it. They're willing to do anything they can to get it. And these facilities are, ponying up and doing what they have to do to get people there.
So it sounds like the residents are actually driving these changes, not the industry saying, let's try to attract people with these changes and see how it works.
That's typically how it works in most places. The people will drive it. They will demand it, and then the businesses that succeed will be the ones that step up and meet those demands. So yes, the residents are asking for bigger and better things, and they're getting it in a lot of places.
Are we talking assisted living facilities or whole neighborhoods oriented toward senior living as a community? What kinds of facilities are you looking, was your story
It's
about?
probably less assisted living, and it's more community living. It's more younger retirees, mid-60s, early 70s. My grandma's one of them. She's a little bit older, but she lives in a facility in Texas. And when I didn't put her in there, my mom and her sisters put her in there. She hated it for about a week. And it started with playing bingo with her friends, and then being able to eat with her friends. And now you can hardly get her to walk out. She still owns her home, but I don't think she's been to it in 2 years. And that's a lot of what you're seeing is they want to be able to go someplace that becomes their home. And and they're still fairly active. They want to be able to go on hikes right there from that facility or real close to it. They want to be able to sew and quilt and go on picnics and not have to leave.
You mentioned bingo, and actually in the story, one of the things mentioned was that the people going into these homes, these assisted living or these community residential areas, don't just want to play bingo, that they are more multifaceted than that. What are some other examples of the amenities that are popping up that we didn't used to see?
Well, the biggest one that we reported in the story was just the food. They're hiring 4-star chefs to cook 4-star meals, really fancy things that, would probably cost the rest of us $60-70 a person, and they're eating it every night. Because, it costs them. It's part of their deal, but they don't have to pay for it each night.
So it's built into the overall.
It's built into their cost. A lot of these communities are all inclusive. You pay your one fee, and it includes everything. It includes all the games. It includes all the food. It includes all your utilities. If you can afford it, it's a pretty good deal.
That's, I think, the key. You just said if you can afford it. Are these, if we're seeing kind of more luxurious housing facilities, is that filtering into the rest of the market? As this gets more expensive, is the other senior living facilities also getting more expensive?
I think they'd almost have to, because the reality is, with the newer ones and the more modern ones that are offering all these amenities, the other ones, even the older ones, are forced to change what they offer to keep people there. And anytime you offer something new, the cost goes up. Our story said that the average in Tucson was $36,000 a year per person. So for a family of a husband and wife, that's $72,000 a year. That's a lot of money. But if they have it, they spend the $72,000, and that's all they have to really spend. They might want to leave and go visit their kids and grandkids at some point, but while they're there, they don't have to pay for food. They don't have to worry about any other expense.
And are we seeing places that are just designated to one type of living, one type of care, or is it facilities where someone can move throughout the facility depending on their medical needs, for example?
I suspect you see a little bit of both. Most of the ones we talked about specifically in this story were for the younger, more active people. If you got to the point where you really need around-the-clock medical care, it'd probably be a different facility. But there are facilities that within a complex can do both. You could start off, and as you need more care, you move into a different place, but it's still in the same area, so you still feel more at home.
All right, David Rupp-Calvis, thanks for joining us for your first week on Metro Week. Thanks to you who've been here many times, Becky and Dylan. And that's our show for this week. As usual, all the stories we produce at Arizona Public Media are available on our website. You can listen to stories or play a live stream from NPR 89.1 or watch past editions of Metro Week and our other TV shows. Next, Arizona Week checks in with wildfire experts about this summer's dangers.